B-52 bombing of Hanoi, Vietnam, in late 1972 was part of the U.S. Operation Rolling Thunder. The B-52 Stratofortress, one of the most advanced bombers of the U.S., was deployed to attack Hanoi, hoping to force Vietnam to surrender. The U.S. believed that this attack would quickly achieve its objective, as the B-52 could fly at 10,000 meters beyond the reach of most air defense systems. American pilots were encouraged that all they needed to do was press a button and return to base safely. The U.S. Air Force was confident that the operation would succeed without significant resistance. However, reality proved otherwise, as Vietnam had thoroughly prepared for the attack and was determined to protect Hanoi at all costs. Vietnam's air defense system, particularly the SAM-2 missiles, inflicted heavy losses on the U.S., right from the early days of the operation. Initially, the U.S. had high expectations for Operation Rolling Thunder, believing that with its superior air force, it would quickly crush Vietnam's air defenses and force the Hanoi government to accept U.S. conditions in negotiations. The U.S. Air Force deployed over 200 B-52s and hundreds of tactical aircraft, expecting to bomb Hanoi and Haiphong for 12 days and nights, completely destroying strategic targets. American pilots were encouraged with messages of confidence, believing they only needed to press a button to safely return to base without encountering any significant obstacles. In the eyes of U.S. military commanders, Vietnam's air defense system, mainly SAM-2 missiles, posed no serious threat. The U.S. believed that powerful electronic jamming technology would neutralize the enemy's radar and missile systems, creating favorable conditions for airstrikes. They also underestimated Vietnam's ability to resist, assuming that with outdated fighter aircraft like the MiG-17 and MiG-21, Vietnam could not face the advanced U.S. fighters. The U.S. Air Force was confident of victory, seeing the operation as only a matter of time, believing the attacks would force Vietnam to concede. President Richard Nixon and U.S. military officials were convinced that the operation would create a psychological impact, forcing Vietnam to agree to negotiations on terms favorable to the U.S., and that the operation would be concluded with a clear victory within a week. The reality of Operation Rolling Thunder far exceeded U.S. expectations. Right from the first days, U.S. pilots began to experience strong resistance from Vietnam's air defense forces, something they hadn't anticipated. Despite using modern electronic jamming methods and tactics to disable the enemy's radar and missiles, Vietnam's air defense system, particularly the SAM-2 missiles, proved to be much stronger than the U.S. had predicted. On the first day of the operation, Vietnam succeeded in shooting down 3 B-52s, forcing the U.S. to face severe losses right from the start. U.S. pilots not only faced danger from SAM-2 missiles, but also from Vietnam's fighter aircraft, which, though outdated, could still create significant obstacles for B-52 formations. Vietnam's air defense system had been greatly improved, using new radar and advanced tactical methods, making U.S. airstrikes much less effective than expected. The U.S. mobilized a massive air force, but the number of B-52s shot down on the first night left American commanders shocked. U.S. pilots felt they were facing a fire net of air defense that was difficult to overcome. The failure to dominate the skies over Hanoi and Haiphong forced the U.S. military to adjust its tactics in the early days of the operation. The morale of American pilots was severely impacted as they faced continuous losses, contrary to their expectations. Instead of a quick victory, the operation turned into a fierce struggle, with increasing damage to U.S. forces. Vietnam's defense in Operation Rolling Thunder demonstrated thorough preparation and excellent strategic response to the U.S. onslaught. Despite the U.S. mobilizing a powerful air force with over 200 B-52s and hundreds of tactical aircraft, Vietnam implemented an intelligent defense strategy, effectively using air defense systems and flexible tactics. The SAM-2 missile system, supported by radar and guidance equipment, became a key weapon in stopping B-52 attacks. From the early days of the operation, Vietnam shot down 3 B-52s, which the U.S. never expected. The SAM-2 missiles, supplied by the Soviet Union, though not the most advanced system, proved highly effective under the specific conditions of war. Vietnam also used a proactive defense strategy, adjusting air defense and missile units rather than relying on passive defense. SAM missile battalions were deployed throughout the Hanoi and Haiphong areas, working in coordination with anti-aircraft units and fighters, creating a fire net that was difficult to penetrate. Furthermore, Vietnam improved its combat methods by continuously adjusting tactics based on the realities of the battlefield. One crucial factor in Vietnam's defense was the coordination between missile units, anti-aircraft units, and fighter aircraft. The MiG-21 fighters, though inferior to America's modern aircraft, were effectively used to attack U.S. aircraft, protect air defense positions, and support anti-aircraft units. Vietnam also used psychological warfare tactics to weaken U.S. pilots' morale. The significant losses in the early days of the operation created panic within the U.S. Air Force, undermining pilot confidence. The successful shooting down of B-52s was widely reported, not only on the battlefield, but also through international media channels, creating a major psychological impact on the U.S. and the international community. Vietnam's strategic response was not only limited to effective defense, but also involved exploiting favorable tactical and geographical factors. Along with deploying missile systems, Vietnam used asymmetrical warfare tactics, exploiting terrain, weather, and unpredictable factors to complicate matters for the enemy. Throughout the operation, Vietnam cleverly used surprise elements to keep U.S. pilots constantly facing uncertainty and danger, weakening their ability to respond. Vietnam's defense strategy forced the U.S. not only to change tactics, but also to face heavy losses. The U.S. Air Force, once confident and proud, suffered a massive psychological shock when B-52s, their symbol of military power, were swiftly shot down. The battlefield situation forced U.S. commanders to reassess and continuously adjust tactics, but without the desired outcome. During this time, the resilience and determination of the Vietnamese people became a crucial factor in successfully defending Hanoi and Haiphong. The psychological impact of Operation Rolling Thunder on the U.S. Air Force was immense and influenced their tactical adjustments throughout the operation. The U.S., with its powerful Air Force and superior military technology, expected a quick victory. However, right from the first days of the operation, when 3 B-52s were shot down on the first night, U.S. pilots were thrown into a state of confusion and concern. Pilots, trained and equipped to face air combat threats, were suddenly confronted with an enemy capable of inflicting significant damage they hadn't anticipated. The B-52s, symbols of U.S. military might, being shot down, severely weakened the fighting spirit of the pilots. These aircraft, once considered invincible, had now become easy targets for Vietnam's air defense systems. The sight of B-52s falling from the night sky, with massive explosions and smoke enveloping the area, shocked not only the pilots involved, but the entire U.S. Air Force. This image undermined pilots' confidence and made them feel uneasy about future attacks. This sense of confusion and unease led to the adjustment of U.S. tactics. Initially, U.S. pilots were trained to conduct large-scale attacks, bombing in tight formations, but after facing significant losses, this tactic was altered. The U.S. began conducting drip-feed attacks, bombing in separate waves, hoping to minimize damage. However, this didn't produce the desired effect, as each wave of attacks was anticipated and countered effectively by Vietnam. The U.S. also had trouble dealing with Vietnam's air defense systems. Initially, they believed that strong electronic jamming devices would disable Vietnam's radar and SAM-2 missile systems. However, as SAM-2 missiles continued to hit their targets and B-52s were repeatedly shot down, the U.S. was forced to adjust its tactics. Pilots were required to fly at lower altitudes and change flight paths to avoid being attacked, but this only increased the risk of encountering attacks from below. Moreover, the U.S. struggled with coordination between fighter aircraft and B-52s. F-4 and F-105 fighters were deployed to protect B-52 formations, but when these fighters couldn't stop Vietnam's aircraft and couldn't fully neutralize SAM-2 missile sites, U.S. Air Force commanders had to change their attack methods, moving from coordinated operations to dispersed tactics, hoping to reduce risks and make quick strikes with strong electronic jamming. Despite these changes, the U.S. was unable to prevent continued failure in the operation. Pilots faced a real psychological battle as they were constantly out of touch with their teammates, witnessed the defeat of seemingly invincible aircraft, and worked under extreme stress. This led to a major shift in U.S. strategy. They had to reduce the intensity of their attacks and adjust their operational plans to minimize further losses. On the other hand, the losses suffered by the U.S. only strengthened Vietnam's resolve to continue fighting. Vietnam's air defense system, well organized and well trained, proved extraordinarily effective, showing that even with superior numbers and technology, fighting spirit and tactical ability could make all the difference. This spirit inspired both the military and the people of Vietnam, strengthening their resilience and motivation to continue fighting while creating a powerful psychological impact on their adversary, forcing the U.S. to face unforeseen defeats. Vietnam's victory in Operation Rolling Thunder at the end of 1972 was one of the most significant turning points in the resistance against the U.S. Despite facing a powerful air force with over 200 B-52s and hundreds of other tactical aircraft, Vietnam demonstrated resilience and determination, not only fighting against the U.S. military, but also against other challenges, such as a lack of equipment and resources. This victory was not only a military achievement, but also a symbol of Vietnam's spirit and tactical ingenuity. From the very beginning of the operation, Vietnam effectively demonstrated its defense capability. The air defense system, primarily the SAM-2 missiles, shot down many B-52s, forcing the U.S. to adjust its tactics and fail to achieve its strategic objectives. The success in shooting down the modern U.S. bombers proved that Vietnam's strength came not only from numbers, but also from its intelligent and creative fighting abilities.